Molly Manning Walker was for a time a very prolific cinematographer and began making short films, I believe, in the last couple of years. And this is her feature debut. It is was quite a surprise for both me and George, who saw it at the festival. I'll give a quick summary of the plot. It's called How to Have Sex. It's about a trio of young English girls who make one of these visits to Southern Europe that people who've just completed their exams often make, to Malia in this case, to party and drink and have sex. Is what they're hoping to do. The focal point of this trio is Tara, the main character, who is on the poster. She is a virgin and is sort of uncomfortable about this and sort of hoping to make a splash in these various pool parties. The first night they all go out together, but they don't really fraternize with anyone else, and they get kind of hideously smashed. And then in the morning they befriend this group of people on a chalet just opposite, and including two. Well, there's a lesbian called Paige who befriends the lesbian in their group, and then these two chaps. Badger, a kind of somewhat tattooed Geordie lad, and his mate Paddy who's slightly more normal looking. But they're all kind of sesh heads. They're all likely lads. They're all cheeky chaps, and they all go out together. They get up to some pretty shocking kind of. I didn't really know.
Is it basically English spring breakers?
Yeah, it's like sort of Malaga, Marbella spring breakers. There's a kind of crazy.
Well, I mean,
scene.
we said I turned to you and like within the first minutes, it's like, "Mum, can we have spring breakers?" It's like, no.
Yeah, but it actually, I mean, there are lots of like, it's kind of in-betweeners movies-esque in the first half, and then in the second half, as
Kevin and Perry go large. If you're going to be listening,
For the
older listeners,
and the purists,
before my time. But yes, as you can generally predict from the first half, which is very kind of jubilant and frivolous, there is something lurking, something quite dark ahead. Tara goes off piste, breaks away from the group. Has she loses her virginity to this guy Paddy. It's, they're both a bit drunk. It's sort of it's not the most romantic moment, but it's consensual, and they have it. And then later on, she kind of goes missing. Everyone worries about her. When she returns, she gets sort of not very much kind of attention from Paddy. He seems to already have moved on, not be very interested in her. And then something very unpleasant happens between them in the following day. And there's this extraordinary scene. A lot of this shot is shot in kind of single takes, but there's this extraordinary scene where she is absolutely shattered, wanting to get some sleep, and Paddy kind of slides into her room and begins to kind of make for her, while her friends are kind of calling her friends who are all sort of egging her on.
Oh yeah.
One of her friends sort of calls and asks if she's okay, and like tries to check on her. Meanwhile, he's kind of like an octopus, kind of grasping around her. It's a very sort of suspenseful and painful and ultimately heartbreaking film, made mostly with very admirable restraint. And yeah, I liked it quite a lot. George, what was your impression?
Yeah, I mean, I thought, as we spoke about afterward, I think it was, it's not hard to have a pretty exciting depiction of like the early stage of the galdom on holiday, and everyone jubilant and like wasted over kebabs and like, oh, we got to get her back to the hotel. I love you, babe. Like this, And so you're with it for the first 30 minutes, sort of, I think, irrespective of who the director is or really what their cinematic chops were. Because also, I mean, we haven't spoken about it, but it was buttressed by this great kind of UK EDM soundtracks. We had Disclosure, we had Hudmo, we had like...
Jack Wabb was the supervisor on...
really? Okay, nice. And the kind of make or break point does become, when you remember that this is an English film, the slide into a different tonal register, right? Because it could be so frequently mishandled, especially given not mishandled, just kind of and this is the point at which everything becomes over determining and whatever looseness or kind of formal plasticity there is kind of goes away. But instead, for instance, we go to the moment when Tara, the central girl, disappears. That like this amazing void opens up in the film, which is sustained, and the way that she kind of emotionally calibrates the different reactions of the different members of her group is really very fine tuned, because you see that like the girl who's meant to be her closest friend is hoping that the absence of Tara will give her an opportunity to move in on this other lad that they've met, whereas he and the rest of that party are like already concerned, and there just enough space is left for us to kind of really speculate on the like severity of what could have happened, and everything we sort of instinctively replay the first half of the movie in our minds, so we then go through exactly the same process that all the others are going through, of trying to reconstruct the night, Yeah. And of course, we've only at that point seen partial instances of it. I think a misstep was that it actually then showed us replay.
Yes, although for the narrative with Paddy, we sort of had to see that they.
We had to see parts, but I think
she then has this whole adventure with these other people who never reappear, who aren't very important. She just kind of finds another crowd of people who aren't sort of bad or good. They're quite nice to her, and then she doesn't have a phone, so she just ends up getting back late.
It seems to echo
what the strip, I guess, in Malia. And by the way, the segue we could have gone for with Zone of Interest. Malia was, under occupation by the Nazis, so there is
almost everywhere was there. It
like
feels
Jersey.
like some of the places it seems to echo some of the critique we had of a film like After Sun, which showed us too much.
I mean, I wouldn't say this was something that bothers me at all when we're watching. It's just something that's coming up now that we're speaking about it. But we have this amazing shot down the strip, really into the vanishing point, where ballasted on both sides by kebab shops and all the rest of it, and you see this sort of wreckage of like whatever it is, kind of 6 a.m. and it looks
mountains in the background.
Yeah, it looks like Fallujah or something. It looks like a disaster zone. And then we cut back. We see the antics of her night before when she's gone AWOL, and then we see her returning down this same strip, like completely desolate, abandoned, no phone, in her body contrast and crying, and
wow,
and it's very well handled, I think.
Almost reminiscent of Ulrich Seidel, actually. That sort of sprung to mind at various points.
His film's about sort of love and commerce and travel.
Yeah, like an unsqueamish sort of approach to a quite extreme
Paradise Love.
Yeah.
And I felt it was like visually very self-assured and confident of itself. The way that this final confession scene in the duty free, which I won't spoil, is blocked, and this shot is really, really magnificent. I think
a lot of extraordinary moments of blocking. One massive reservation, which I think we can kind of talk about in depth as a group, is the use of what we're now going to call Foley dips.
Yes.
Which is a moment in a film where the general atmos is kind of turned down, or potentially a kind of EQ is put on it such that it sounds very heavy. And
it filters out certain, like exactly the kind of fullness,
the
of the
general
sound.
fullness of the sound, the higher tones, frequencies, and you start to hear the individual Foley of particular actions, maybe the touching of hands. Or kind of the opening of a bottle, or something that one of the characters notices. You might even have a close-up of this. And everything in the sound design and the mise-en-scène and the camera work kind of focuses in on what the character is thinking, or focuses in on what the character is looking at as a way of like gesturing. This happened in Horde so much, and it was a big part of, as a methodology, it was a big part of why I hated Horde. But in How to Have Sex, it happens quite a lot, but it doesn't. It sort of just feels like aberrant from the general approach of How to Have Sex cinematographically, which I thought was wonderful. but yeah, this technique and actually, I mean, in our Christian Petzold podcast, we talk about how this happens in Yella. Like like Petzold experiments with someone breaking a biro or something, and suddenly the sound goes down, and you can. It just seems completely anathema to what cinema should do, which
If I'm
is
honest,
allow
I
you
think
to
it's a
find
technique
things.
which has been imported into art house filmmaking from commercial filmmaking, right? Like
It's
it's
sort of
some
Guy Ritchie almost, like kind of thriller.
yeah, also from this, but it feels like it's more familiar to like the beer advert or something when it like
Yeah,
this
Well,
pushing noise.
it's a
And you
classic
hear
Guinness.
you hear the clink of the bottle, and
Yeah.
then the
yeah,
whoosh
yeah.
back out, and then the
I
party
feel,
comes.
yeah, there's certain ways it's doing it. It basically is condensing sort of I suppose it's a backdoor into interiority for these characters because it shows us what they're focused on or what they're losing focus about. I think it can be a
It's
little
a
bit
purported
lazy.
short circuit to it that doesn't
Mm.
actually
No,
accomplish.
it doesn't really help us there. And the thing is, the problem is, I think it's often accompanied. So there's the Foley dip, and it's often accompanied with the snapback. So we'll sometimes get, and it'll often be accompanied with a cut. You know, it might be like someone's fully focusing, and then we get a slam, and they're like getting back in the car, and they've just shut the car door. We'll get these kind of things, and they're quite forced, and they see, like you said, they seem to owe a lot to commercial filmmaking, but also, I suppose, to Netflix dramas and sort of, you know, BBC drama. It's in this kind of quite pedestrian milquetoast style of filmmaking, which kind of makes up for, you know, nuance elsewhere by creating these moments, these kind of sharp peaks of focus. And I think
And really, there aren't,
ever
you know,
seen
there
it
aren't
used
cheat
well.
codes to truthiness in filmmaking. I mean,
No.
you can't just liberally apply this and hope
it's not
gonna
sufficiently
come to-
ambiguous.
But what was annoying about How to Have Sex is that it had essentially was already succeeding in depicting, particularly at the moments when it was most insistent upon the Foley dip. So when it was trying to show us, you know, the level of kind of isolation and alienation this girl was feeling, both from her peer group and from the like situation she finds herself in whilst on holiday in Malia, right? And here it was kind of instructive to compare it with something like Spring Breakers, where you have this sustained impasto audio soundtrack of like EDM, right? Of hype, trashy EDM throughout the entire thing, without any need to hollow it out in this fashion or do these kind of like
the wall of sound approach, which is Lynch, something Lynch has kind of perfected as well with Twin Peaks in particular. And actually, you know, a lot of his filmmaking, which is this kind of perpetual din, and this quite confected sound, which actually becomes a character in its own right when it's sustained throughout the film. I actually think the source as well for this is probably going to be Spielberg and Ridley Scott in their own ways, in a slightly more elevated way, because, you know, Saving Private Ryan introduced that in a big way, this loss of hearing that then snaps back.
Well, it goes on an interesting journey, right? I mean, it comes from Come and See.
Come and See, yeah. So it's kind of horseshoe. It's kind of horseshoe almost. It's or not. It's just kind of come back. I mean,
Come and See does it in a beautifully literal way, because it's literally trying to convey the experience of tinnitus in war. And in a way, and also maybe it's more appropriate to use it in war than it is in like a nightclub. I don't know. Like there's like certain sort of registers.
Yeah.
And yeah, actually, Jonathan Glazer does use an extended Foley dip that never snaps back in one of the final scenes of Zone of Interest. I think, where where he's at this big hall full of Nazis and the sound sort of goes down and he's sort of just on his own. Again, I actually thought filmmaking was good enough. It didn't need to do that, but it didn't quite offend me as much as the way it happened in Horde, which I think where it was trying to stand in for good filmmaking.
You can overindulge on these techniques, I think.
And if the message is generally to say this person stands apart from their environment, then cinema already has
so many tools.
So many tools at its disposable in order
literal
to
camera
that information, which he used for the best part of 70 years of his history before this, or 80 years before this. Comes in as a method, so
it's symptomatic of a loss of faith in film and film's tools. I think it does feel like we're living through an era of the Foley dip because people have forgotten about the beauty, have forgotten their confidence in cinema to communicate.
Forgetting about the interplay of the camera and space. You know, you think about even in its silliest iterations and most beautiful, which is filming at Tati with Playtime. You know, how better to display the sort of urban alienation of character like Monsieur Hulot than to shoot him in these massive wides. You know, he's truly alone in these vast capitalist modern spaces, and that's a tool that's, you know, integral to film.
Absolutely.
You know, we don't see Monsieur Hulot slowly pressing his hand into the squeaky leather chair. And
that is a very true of Hulot. I mean, there's something really. I don't talk about Tati very much, but there's something in Mon Oncle and in all of his films. The sort of oddness of the sound design, always at a distance visually, has this really like kind of. It brings you closer. It makes you look closer and listen closer. But if you do this Foley dip thing, you're patronizing the audience, and you're basically not allowing them that wonderful agency that the spectator has.
It's creating a kind of path dependency about how you kind of pursue yourself through the film. I think you know, there's only one way to go in this moment. It focuses you too deeply, too closely on one specific thing, and doesn't trust the eye to sort of make it.
And it has all the subtlety of kind of a mid-rate DJ just kind of cutting out the
faders down,
cutting out the treble for a drop, and then just putting it back in. You know, it really is at that level of.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
I will watch it though. I think I'll like to watch it.
Absolutely go and see How to Have Sex. I wish it wasn't too late to change the title, which is a ghastly and awful, annoying title. Although it's a memorable title, it will stick in people's heads. Certainly when I was in the press queue, people were kind of muttering constantly. Someone even looked at me and said, "Is this the queue for?" And I just was like, yeah. That one. And actually, I saw a red carpet interview. This is a bit of interesting kind of British film speculation, because this was funded by the BFI, whose kind of tastes we tend to be quite skeptical of on this podcast. But the director Molly Manning Walker sort of said on the red carpet, "Oh, I hope this film will tell people how to have sex better." I was sort of felt slightly not that isn't an aim that I share, but I felt like the film does a lot more than just provide kind of
sex education.
Essentially, I felt like it was underselling the project, but I also understand that maybe that's sort of what you have to say, or how you have to frame something that's as nuanced and rich as this. And obviously, I do think it does. I think what was interesting about the relationships in it is it doesn't like diagrammatically tell you like something sort of banal about consent. What it shows that's very interesting and engaging is like the role that relationships and care play in physical intimacy. And I think you know, at the very, this is giving away bits of the plot, but like at the start, you know, you're wondering, when you see these guys, you're wondering like, who is she going to pick? Like, how is this going to pan out? You're constantly worried that someone you've begun to trust, like the character Badger, for instance, you know, you start to think, oh God, is he going to turn out to do something horrible? You know, there's this more handsome figure, Paddy, who becomes who's an old friend of Badger, and there's this wonderful scene after he's sort of he's, you know, hurt her quite a lot, where Paddy says, this is sort of zone of interest, banality of evil territory, but where you know, Badger sort of senses that Paddy's done something wrong to Tara, and he just sort of says, "Oh yeah, he's crazy, man. You know, but I've known him since we were kids. You know, he lived on the road, on the same road as me. Our parents, we used to hang out." And she just says, "That's cool." It's just like really icy. But yeah, there's something about the way that she has this affection. She initially thinks he's the more attractive one, and her friends were like, "You should go with him. He's much better than this guy." And and then it's his cruelty. It's his lack of care, lack of awareness or sensitivity, in his capacity as someone who is sort of romantically involved with the protagonist, that makes that like it's just. What I'm getting at is that the story has a beautiful and undogmatic nuance to it, which I feel the title doesn't. Even though, of course, it does tell you how not to have sex.
I think it's a tender portrayal of. I mean, it sounds weird to say this in the context of what the film ultimately portrays, but it is a tender portrayal of this sort of working class space, and it is not like a patronizing or a moralistic or an appalled one.
Correct.
Which regards it as, you know, like vulgar and debased or anything. I mean, like, it's, you know, even like there are these like gross kind of party games that they're all encouraged, this sort of forced fun sort of situations where they're all like a bit hesitant to get involved, actually. And yeah, I think all of this was handled like kind of. But what the question it begs is, you know, everyone makes a Bildungsroman as their first feature.
That's literally the word that was rolling around in my head. I was like,
What-
this is like
what
a
do they make
concentrated Bildungsroman.
Their second ones. Like,
Well, I'm afraid to say that the best British films are in the last 20 years have all been debuts. And some directors, Mark Jenkin, Peter Strickland, Jonah Hogg actually I think has kept.
Jonah Hogg has
kept
evolved
Hog's best
interestingly,
film is still
yeah.
unrelated.
But her best film is still unrelated.
Yeah.
But she's kept a higher standard than the other names I mentioned. But yes, there's the case of the dwindling debut.
I think a lot of these
she-
films come from quite personal subject matter often as well,
Yeah.
which means they kind of land with this grand idea. And like you said, George, often Bildungsromans, they're often reflecting their own personal, sentimental and romantic and aesthetic journeys that they're kind of casting onto film. I don't know what this director's background is really like, but it might reflect a certain, you know, sort of shared common experience of you know, university sexual dynamics and things like that.
I watched a short that she made during lockdown. I can't remember the name of it, but you'll be able to find it if you search her name. And it was made, I think it was made as part of some kind of lockdown filmmaking initiative. And it was unlike a lot of the films that were just shot on Zoom in a really kind of naff way. She sort of shot it through windows, and she was making a film about a couple where one of them was quite ill and couldn't mix. And so, it was blocked, but it was blocked in this beautiful way. She did this great thing with depth. So I think it's no bad thing to let cinematographers move up to the directing spot.
Yeah.
Because
Sean Price Williams as well.
True. Sean Price Williams, two sort of DOP come directors.